We've always dreamt of reaching Mars, haven't we? Setting foot on another planet. It's this grand human adventure.
It absolutely is a huge technological and human challenge.
But what if the biggest challenge isn't really the rockets or, the landing? What if something closer to home? Something inside the astronauts themselves, how space changes them.
That's a really critical point. The space environment itself is incredibly hostile to the human body.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going deep into exactly that, the health challenges of long space flights, especially thinking about Mars. We'll look at the science, the risks, and importantly, the solutions being worked on.
And we're drawing on some solid sources here, NASA's own Human Research Program findings, plus key research papers on deep space risks and how we might mitigate them.
Right. Our mission today really is to give you the inside track, to understand these invisible threats, how the body reacts, and the frankly ingenious ways we're trying to keep astronauts safe out there.
It's a fascinating field.
So let's dive right in. NASA has helpfully categorized the main dangers, right? A kind of framework for this.
Yes, they have. They talk about the 5 hazards of human spaceflight. And it's crucial to remember these aren't like separate boxes. They often interact, sometimes making each other worse.
Okay, so what are they?
Well, first up is space radiation. This is the invisible stuff constantly bombarding everything.
The one everyone worries about.
Definitely. Second, isolation and confinement. It's not just boredom, it's the psychological and behavioral strain. Hugely important for teamwork and performance on a long mission.
Right, being cooped up for months or years.
Exactly. Third, distance from Earth. The sheer remoteness. If something goes seriously wrong, medically or technically, Earth is days, weeks, even months away. There's no quick rescue.
A huge logistical hurdle.
Massive. Fourth, gravity fields, or rather the lack of normal gravity, microgravity, and then adjusting to different gravity on, say, Mars and back to Earth again.
That constant shifting.
And fifth, hostile or closed environments. Basically, living inside a machine. Keeping the air breathable, the water drinkable, managing waste, dealing with potential toxins or microbes in a confined space.
That's quite a list. Okay, so while all 5 are obviously critical, today let's really pull apart 2 of the big physical ones, space radiation and microgravity.
Sounds good. They have some of the most profound physiological effects.
Let's start with radiation then. We hear the term, but what is space radiation exactly? And why is it so much more dangerous out there than, say, getting an X-ray?
That's a great question. Space radiation is fundamentally different. It's ionizing radiation, meaning it has enough punch to knock electrons off atoms and molecules. That's what causes direct damage to our cells, including our DNA.
Okay, and where does it come from?
It's mainly from 3 sources. First, you've got galactic cosmic radiation, GCR. These are super high energy particles, mostly protons and heavier atomic nuclei, coming from way outside our solar system, from supernovae and other cosmic events.
So from deep space.
Exactly, and they are incredibly penetrating. Think about this. A single proton might pass through every cell nucleus in an astronaut's body every day in deep space. The heavier ones, called HEE particles, hit less often, maybe every few months, but they do a lot more damage when they do. Shielding against these is really, really hard.
Wow, okay, what else?
Then you have solar particle events, or SPEs. These are bursts of energetic particles, mostly protons again, thrown out by the sun during solar flares or coronal mass ejections.
So coming from our own star.
Right, and these are unpredictable. They can be incredibly intense, delivering a huge dose in a short time, and they can happen even when the sun is supposed to be in a quiet period.
That sounds particularly nasty. Unpredictable danger.
It is. And finally, there's intravehicular radiation. This is actually secondary radiation, neutrons, gamma rays, things like that, created when the GCR or SPE particles slam into the spacecraft hull or the shielding itself.
Wait, so the shielding can create more radiation inside?
In a way, yes. It changes the nature of the radiation. It can break down those heavy GCR particles into a shower of secondary particles, which can still be harmful. It's a complex physics problem.
That really highlights the challenge. So when these particles, primary or secondary, go through an astronaut, what's the actual damage? Short-term, long-term?
The effects are, well, they're widespread and occur on different timescales. You can have acute effects during the mission and then chronic long-term risks that might show up years or even decades later.
Like what?
Okay, one big category is degenerative tissue effects and carcinogenesis. That high-energy radiation, especially the GCR, damages cells in ways that can accelerate aging processes. We're talking increased risk of cataracts, heart disease.
So it literally ages you faster.
It seems to mimic some aspects of aging, yes, and crucially, DNA damage. If the cell's repair mechanisms can't keep up or make mistakes, you get mutations, genomic instability, and that can ultimately lead to cancer.
Cancer's the big one everyone mentions.
It is a major long-term concern, though it's important to say our models for space radiation cancer risk are still evolving. They often rely on data from atomic bomb survivors or animal studies because, thankfully, we haven't had large numbers of people exposed to deep space radiation for long periods yet.
Okay, what else besides cancer and aging?
There are also effects on the central nervous system, the CNS. Radiation can impair cognitive functions, things like learning, memory, decision-making. High doses could even kill nerve cells. This is obviously a huge concern for astronauts needing peak mental performance.
Absolutely. Can't have fuzzy thinking during a Mars landing.
Precisely. And then especially with those intense solar particle events, you can get acute radiation syndromes, basically radiation sickness, fatigue, nausea, vomiting, skin damage, damage to internal organs, and it can hammer the immune system.
So you could get sick right there on the mission.
Yes. Plus, increased susceptibility to infections, wounds might heal slower. There's also individual variation. Some people seem to be more sensitive than others.
This paints a pretty grim picture, especially thinking about a long Mars mission. What does this radiation dose actually look like for, say, a trip to Mars and back?
It's significantly higher than anything experienced in low Earth orbit, like on the ISS. A Mars mission, whether it's a shorter Opposition Class 1, maybe 600 days, or a longer Conjunction Class mission of around 900 days with more surface time, they both involve really substantial radiation exposure.
How much higher are we talking?
Well, on the ISS, astronauts get roughly 0.5 to 1 millisievert, or MSV, per day. In deep space, cruising between planets, it's estimated around 1.84 millisieverts per day. On Mars itself, the thin atmosphere and the planet offer some shielding, maybe down to 0.64 millisv per day, but it's still much higher than LEO.
And over a 600 or 900 day mission, that adds up.
It really does. NASA's risk models, based on 2012 data, suggested that for a group of 100 astronauts on a Mars mission, in a worst-case statistical scenario, about 5 to 7 might later die from cancer directly caused by that mission's radiation exposure.
5 to 7% increased lifetime risk.
On top of their baseline risk, yes, and potentially reducing their life expectancy by maybe 15 years on average for those affected. It's a serious number, and refining those risk estimates is a huge ongoing effort.
Okay, that is definitely sobering.
Yeah.
So, the multi-billion-dollar question. How do we protect astronauts? What are the mitigation strategies?
It has to be a layered approach. There's no single magic bullet. First, you think about shielding.
Putting stuff between the astronauts and the radiation.
Exactly. Passive shielding is the traditional way, using materials like water, polyethylene plastic, aluminum, even using Martian soil, the regolith, or finding natural shelters like lavitudes on Mars for habitats.
But you said shielding has limits, especially against GCR.
It does. High-energy GCR particles can punch through a lot of material, and making shielding thick enough adds a lot of weight, which is a massive issue for launch costs and spacecraft design, plus the secondary radiation problem we mentioned.
So passive shielding isn't enough on its own? What else?
That leads to research into active shielding, using technology to create electromagnetic fields like electric fields to slow particles, or powerful magnetic fields to deflect them, almost like a mini magnetosphere for the ship. There's even work on plasma shielding.
Like sci-fi force fields.
Sort of, but these are still very much in the research and development stage. They require huge amounts of power, and we don't fully know their potential long-term effects on the crew inside the field.
Okay, so shielding is one part. What about protecting the body itself?
Right, biological protection. One avenue is pharmacology drugs, radioprotectors taken before exposure to limit damage, and radiomitigators taken after exposure to help with repair. Antioxidants are a big focus here.
Are there effective drugs now?
There are some used clinically on Earth, like amifostine, but finding ones that are safe, effective against space radiation, easy to take, and stable for years in space, that's the challenge.
And then there's the really cutting-edge stuff.
Indeed. Gene therapy. This is looking at ways to boost our own natural defenses, enhancing DNA repair genes, increasing antioxidants produced by our cells, maybe even borrowing genes from extremely radiation-resistant organisms.
Like those little water bears.
Yeah.
Tardigrade.
Exactly. They have a protein called DSUP, damage suppressor, that helps protect their DNA. Could we potentially enhance human cells with something similar? Or identify genetic markers in humans that correlate with radiation resistance and using tools like CRISPR maybe enhance that resistance. It's futuristic and raises ethical questions, but it's being explored.
Wow, okay. And what about hibernation? I've heard that mentioned.
Yes, hibernation or torpor. This is fascinating. Inducing a state of significantly reduced metabolism like animals do. Studies show that animals in torpor are remarkably resistant to radiation damage.
How does that work, slowing everything down?
It seems so. Lower metabolic rate means less cellular activity, potentially less damage propagation. Plus, think of the other benefits for a long trip. Potentially less food, water, oxygen needed, maybe fewer psychological issues from boredom if you're asleep for parts of the journey. It might even reduce muscle and bone loss from microgravity.
That sounds almost too good to be true. Can we actually induce that safely in humans?
That's the big question. We can't naturally hibernate, but research is ongoing into inducing a torpor-like state pharmacologically or through other means. There's been some success in non-hibernating animals, like rats. It's a long shot for near-term Mars missions, perhaps, but a really intriguing possibility for the future.
So many different angles. And how do we track all this? The exposure, the risk?
That's where monitoring and assessment comes in. There are international guidelines, like from the ICRP, setting career dose limits. NASA recently updated theirs to 600 mSv total effective dose, removing previous age and sex differences to be more equitable.
So there are hard limits.
Yes. Based on the principles of justification, the benefit must outweigh the risk. Optimization keeping doses as low as reasonably achievable, the allo-A principle, and limitation those individual dose limits. We use sophisticated computer models to predict the radiation environment, and instruments on spacecraft, like the tissue-equivalent proportional counter on the ISS, to measure the dose astronauts are actually receiving.
Real-time tracking.
And even specialized biological tests. We'll get into biodosimetry later, actually. Plus, small satellites like BioSentinel are flying yeast outside the magnetosphere right now to directly measure biological responses to deep space radiation.
It's clear radiation is a huge piece of the puzzle. Okay, let's shift gears to the other big physical challenge, microgravity. The simple fact of being weightless. How does that mess with us?
Fundamentally, we evolved over millions of years under Earth's constant one-gene pull. Take that away, and almost everything changes because our bodies rely on that mechanical loading, that stress, for cues. In space, astronauts are basically in continuous freefall. That lack of weight sensation, that tense extreme environment affects nearly every physiological system.
Now, we can't perfectly replicate that on Earth, can we?
Not true weightlessness, no. But scientists use simulators like the rotating wall vessel or the random positioning machine. These devices constantly change orientation to average out the gravity vector, tricking cells and culture into behaving somewhat like they would in microgravity. It helps us study the cellular mechanisms.
Okay, so when someone is up there for months, what are the biggest health hits from being weightless?
They are pretty widespread. Let's start with the obvious ones, the musculoskeletal system.
Bones and muscles.
Right. Bones lose density significantly. Without the daily stress of supporting your weight, the body starts resorbing bone faster than it builds it. It's like a fast track to osteoporosis.
Even in fit astronauts.
Yes. The balance between bone formation and resorption gets thrown off. Muscles, especially the anti-gravity ones like in your legs and back, start to atrophy, to waste away. They lose mass and strength. Astronauts have to exercise vigorously, often 2 hours a day, using special resistance machines just to minimize these losses.
That's why they look weak when they first come back.
Exactly. They feel heavy, weak, sore as their muscles have to readapt to supporting their weight against gravity, that reloading process.
Okay, bones and muscles. What about the heart and circulation?
The cardiovascular system changes dramatically too. Initially, without gravity pulling fluids down, blood and other fluids shift upwards towards the head and chest. That causes the puffy face and skinny bird legs you sometimes see.
The fluid shift.
Yep, the body interprets this as having too much fluid, so it reduces plasma volume, gets rid of fluid. The heart doesn't have to work as hard to pump blood against gravity, so it can actually shrink slightly in size, and cardiac output might decrease over time.
And then when they come back to Earth?
That's when post-flight orthostatic intolerance can hit. The cardiovascular system has adapted to weightlessness and suddenly has to cope with gravity pulling blood back down to the legs. It struggles to compensate quickly enough, leading to dizziness, lightheadedness, even fainting when they stand up.
So the body adapts too well to space, in a way.
In some ways, yes. And the adaptation itself causes problems back on Earth. Then there's the sensory motor system. This includes the brain.
The brain changes.
We're seeing evidence of that. Brain imaging studies show the brain can actually shift physically upwards in the skull. There are changes in gray matter distribution, and the ventricles, the fluid-filled spaces in the brain, can enlarge. We're still working to understand the long-term implications of these structural changes.
That sounds unsettling.
It's an active area of research. Functionally, the lack of gravity messes with our sense of balance and orientation. The inner ear's vestibular system isn't getting the usual signals, and these conflict with what the eyes are seeing. This leads to space adaptation syndrome or space motion sickness, basically space sickness, especially in the first few days. It can really impair performance.
Nausea, disorientation.
Mm,
Not good when you need to work.
not at all. And finally, the immune system and wound healing seem to take a hit, too.
The immune system gets weaker.
There's evidence for immunodeficiency. Certain immune cells don't function as well. This could increase susceptibility to infections, maybe even hinder the body's surveillance against cancer cells. We also see latent viruses, like herpes viruses that many people carry harmlessly, sometimes reactivating in astronauts.
That's a worry in a closed environment.
It is. And skin health can suffer itching, rashes, dryness, partly the environment maybe, but also physiological changes. Changes in the skin's microbiome could also play a role. And related to that, wound healing appears to be impaired. The complex process of tissue repair, involving specific cells and proteins like collagen, doesn't seem to work as efficiently. Even minor cuts might heal slower.
So radiation attacks from the outside, microgravity changes you from the inside out. It's a double whammy.
It really is. And remember, these things are happening simultaneously, potentially interacting in ways we don't fully understand yet.
Okay, so we've gone deep on radiation and microgravity. But stepping back, there are broader strategies needed, right? The whole system for keeping astronauts healthy from selection onwards.
Absolutely. It's an integrated approach. It starts with rigorous medical examination requirements, RERS. Astronauts are screened incredibly thoroughly before selection and undergo detailed annual checkups throughout their careers. This builds a long-term health picture to monitor for any occupational effects.
Tracking them over decades.
Precisely. Then there are rules and regulations set by space agencies, defining acceptable risk levels, like those radiation dose limits we discussed. These have to be constantly updated as we learn more.
And training must be key.
Hugely. Training and education includes extensive medical training. Astronauts need to be able to handle a wide range of medical issues autonomously, acting as paramedics or even higher-level caregivers for each other, guided by flight surgeons on the ground when possible.
Being their own first responders.
Essentially, yes. Quarantine is another standard practice. Pre-flight quarantine minimizes the chance of bringing contagious illnesses on board. Planning for in-flight quarantine if someone does get sick is also part of it, though very difficult in tight quarters.
And vaccines.
Vaccination is critical, protecting against common Earth illnesses, but also considering that microbes might behave differently or mutate in the unique spacecraft environment. Things like the herpes virus reactivation underscore the need for vigilance.
What about monitoring the environment itself, inside the ship?
Continuous monitoring is vital. Checking air quality for CO2 buildup, trace contaminants from equipment off-gassing. Water quality is tested regularly for microbes and chemical purity. It's about maintaining that closed ecosystem safely.
You mentioned biodosimetry earlier, measuring radiation effects in the body.
Yes. This involves taking blood samples, usually lymphocytes, before and after flight, and looking for specific types of chromosome damage that are indicative of radiation exposure. It gives a personalized biological measure of the dose received and the body's response, complementing the physical dosimeters. It's actually a medical requirement for some astronauts, depending on the mission.
So it measures the actual biological impact.
Correct. And looking even further ahead, there's the concept of exposomes. This is the idea of tracking all environmental exposures and individual experiences throughout life, diet, chemicals, radiation, stress, everything along with their genetics, to build a highly personalized risk profile.
Tailoring risk assessment to the individual astronaut.
That's the potential. It could be incredibly powerful for predicting susceptibility to spaceflight hazards. But it also raises major ethical questions. How is that sensitive data used? Could it lead to discrimination in crew selection? What about data privacy, especially with differing international laws, like European rules around genetic discrimination? It's a complex area we need to navigate carefully.
Absolutely. Wow. We've covered a huge amount, from GCR particles zipping through cells to bones weakening and brain shifting, and all the ways scientists are trying to counter these effects. It really drives home the sheer challenge.
It does. It shows that going to Mars isn't just an engineering problem, it's a profound human biology problem. But the research is moving forward on so many fronts: shielding, medicine, genetics, even hibernation concepts. While the risks, especially long-term ones like cancer from radiation, are serious and still being quantified, they aren't seen as absolute showstoppers right now.
More like challenges to be overcome through ingenuity and persistence.
Exactly. It's about managing the risk down to acceptable levels through this multi-layered strategy.
So when you think about it, every astronaut orbiting Earth, or one day heading to Mars, isn't just an explorer. They're also, in a very real sense, a living laboratory.
They really are, pushing the boundaries of human physiology and providing invaluable data for protecting future crews.
Which leaves us with a pretty big thought, doesn't it? As we seriously plan these multi-year missions, venturing further and for longer than ever before, we really have to grapple with that risk question. How much risk is acceptable in the name of exploration and discovery?
And what lengths are we willing to go to ethically to protect those pioneers? Modifying humans, accepting higher statistical risks.
The answers we find won't just define the future of spaceflight. They might actually change how we think about human health, resilience, and our fundamental place in the cosmos. Something to ponder.